tell you why it's important to leave behind the story of your life. You never know the impact it may have. Please welcome Jennifer Sue. Unmask the Masked Man, Jennifer Sue.
Is it okay if I close my eyes for a moment and remember the past? Is that okay, Jen? Continue the trend of heckling you tonight? There I go. Oh, Danny boy, the pipes are calling from glen to glen and down the mountainside. The summer's gone and all the flowers dying. 'Tis you, must go and I must buy. My dad used to sing us kids that song at bedtime, and he also used to weave us the greatest bedtime stories where we kids were the heroes and heroines of his grand adventures. I still want a bedtime story now as an adult when I go to bed, a spoken one, but I have to settle on a good book instead. My dad passed away 12 years ago, so there's no more bedtime stories from him. Unfortunately, he didn't tell us enough stories about his childhood growing up. We mostly heard about the happy-go-lucky stuff, his successes that made him look good, and he kind of set the other stuff aside. I think being a parent in a way, and I don't know if you agree with me or not, requires being somewhat of a hypocrite sometimes. You avoid telling those stories of failure and struggle and the stories of sowing your wild oats to your kids because you want them to do better than you and you want them to make better choices and you want your kids to look at you in a certain way. You want them to respect you. So we don't always get to hear everything about our parents. Socrates said that an unexamined life is not worth living. That's pretty strong, right? He doesn't really mince words. It's not that an unexamined life is not as meaningful as an examined life. Now, another philosopher, George Santayana, said, and I'm sure you know this one, those who can't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. So I don't believe it was that my dad didn't remember the past, and I don't know how much he examined or didn't examine his life, but I'm sure his life was worth living. And that when he was gone, I wanted so much to understand who he really was. It's a little like the Lone Ranger, someone who was a hero in your life and came and went and left you saying, who exactly was that masked man? When I went through his personal effects, I found myself in kind of an attempt to piece together a cohesive narrative of his life, looking for clues in all the things that he left behind. I even found my old report cards, and it really moved me that he held on to those for all those years. He must have really been proud of me. I only wish that he'd written about his life, though. Writing a memoir not only helps you understand yourself, but helps those who come after you understand who you were and who they were and their family history. You're not left with just a mishmash of events and dates, but a larger meaning. And who knows, your memoir might end up being more wide-reaching than just a family document. Now, I knew that my dad had grown up more or less fatherless, but this is something that he didn't really want to expound upon. When I was about 5 years old, my grandmother's brother, Uncle Jimmy, moved in with us after his own wife passed away. And I knew that my dad was really proud of Uncle Jimmy. He always went around telling everybody that his uncle was a retired FBI agent. And Uncle Jimmy must have stayed with us for about 6 months, and during that time, every Sunday, he brought our whole family out to dinner. I didn't really think about until after my dad died, why did Uncle Jimmy come and stay with us? He was from New York, we lived in California, he had 2 daughters on the East Coast after all. And when my dad died and I was looking through his personal effects, I found this 34-page document written by Uncle Jimmy about his experience in World War II. And I asked myself, was Uncle Jimmy really like my dad's father? And was my dad like Uncle Jimmy's son? Well, I wasn't able to get an answer to that, but it was really amazing to have that document to read left behind by my great uncle. In the first years after my dad died, I was grieving. Some of the sketchy stuff that I knew about his childhood, when I started to think about it, made sense in terms of the context of his values and his choices and his behavior as an adult. So I called his best friend, Tracy Douglas, who he'd grown up with, and asked him some questions. And the mask kind of started to slip away a little bit, but there were still hidden pieces. So how did I respond to that? Well, I began to go crazy reading about memoirs. I began to study the attempts of others to reveal themselves. And interestingly, the more obscure the subject of a memoir, the better. At the library, I happened upon a title, Borrowed Finery, that I thought was interesting, and so I took it home. It was about a woman named Paula Fox, who was born in the 1920s, and her parents were bohemian wannabe screenwriters who weren't very responsible. When she was born, they shoved her in an orphanage for a few years, and she ended up being fostered by a family. The father was a preacher and his wife, and she had a really good first 4 years of her life until her parents swooped back in and took her back. And then she was passed around among different family members and friends and virtual strangers, and her childhood ended up being not so settled. And by the age of 20, she was pregnant and unmarried, and she ended up having to make a difficult choice. She gave her baby up for adoption. She felt horrible about this because she had felt abandoned all her life, and here she was doing this to her own child. So she used that experience to examine her life and change the course of its direction. She became a writer, she got married, she had more children and provided them a stable childhood. And finally, when she was well into her 50s, she reached out and she found her daughter, and they developed a relationship. And even though they had led these parallel lives that just intersected, they had so many similarities in their personal histories. Abandonment, conflict, family dysfunction, and they felt if they had only been able to be closer to their families and know each other, maybe they could have learned and avoided some of the pitfalls of the people who came before them. I was so interested in this writer after reading the memoir. I went online and I was surprised to find out that her first daughter is Linda Carroll, who is the mother of Courtney Love. And in her memoir, Paula Fox's own mother reminded me, after finding out the family connection, of Courtney Love. Men died around her, substance abuse problems, great big narcissistic personality, very difficult person to get along with. So I hope maybe Courtney has read that memoir and learned something about her family. A memoir is not only an ascendant's gift to descendants, writing one story can impact the world. It can also be a child's gift to a parent. Anne Frank's diary was both. When Anne's father, Otto, returned from Auschwitz to Amsterdam, he had high hopes of finding his family, but was gravely disappointed to discover that his wife and 2 daughters had passed away in concentration camps. So he went through Anne's papers like anyone does when someone passes away, and Anne's words unmasked for him some of the trials of adolescence that children usually hide from their parents. Because she left this document behind, he was privy to that. The discovery, reading, and publishing of Anne's diary must have been just a small recompense for Otto's terrible losses. So you never know how writing down your life story will impact yourself and others. Through writing a memoir, you'll learn about yourself and perhaps unmask a cohesive narrative and meaning to your life that you didn't grasp before. You'll leave behind a legacy for your loved ones and allow them to learn more about you, themselves, and your family history. And who knows the impact the story could have on the world. So what's the meaning of your life? Have you ever really thought about that question? Do those who love you most really know who you are? How do you want others to remember you? I dare you to write it all down before it's too late. Anne Frank may have only been dreaming after all when she said, "I want to be useful or bring enjoyment to all people, even those I've never met. I want to go on living even after my death. And that's why I'm so grateful to God for having given me this gift of writing, which I can use to develop myself and express all that is inside of me." Thank you.